Antarctica is the only continent on Earth with no confirmed indigenous population. Every other landmass, every desert, every frozen tundra, every jungle margin carries the fingerprint of human habitation somewhere in its past. Antarctica does not. That is the official position. For years I accepted it without examination. I wish I still could. The question I keep returning to is not whether people lived there. It is why evidence suggesting they might have is handled with such consistent, careful institutional quiet. That distinction matters. I am not asking you to believe anything yet. I am asking you to notice a pattern with me. The mainstream scientific position is clear and, on its surface, reasonable. Antarctica has been buried beneath an ice sheet for approximately 34 million years. Its interior temperature averages around -57 degrees Celsius. No human civilization, however advanced, could sustain itself there. Most people accept this without question, and they have every right to. The consensus rests on solid work, ice cores, seismic surveys, and decades of international research have built a coherent picture of a continent locked in perpetual cold. The scientists who study Antarctica are serious people working in brutal conditions. The official story did not emerge from negligence or bad faith. It emerged from real evidence. Then there is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral of the same name. It was rediscovered in 1929 in Istanbul's Topkapi palace. It depicts with uncomfortable accuracy a coastline far in the south, one that, at that point in history, no European explorer had ever seen. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, 307 years after Piri Reis completed his chart, and yet the southern landmass on his map does not merely suggest the continent. In several key respects, it corresponds to Antarctica's actual subglacial coastline, buried beneath ice that has been there for millennia. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing keeping this inquiry honest. Piri Reis noted in his own annotations that he compiled the map from older source charts. He did not claim personal discovery of that southern coastline. He claimed inheritance, cartographic knowledge from sources he could not fully name. The obvious counter-argument is that the southern landmass on his map is coincidence, a cartographic guess, a mythological projection, or a misidentification of South America's southern tip. These are serious objections. Cartographers of that era routinely included speculative southern landmasses, following the ancient Greek hypothesis of a great balancing continent in the south. I held that explanation for a long time. It accounts for the map without requiring anything unusual, but I eventually came across the work of Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College in New Hampshire, who in 1966 published Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Hapgood was not a fringe figure. Albert Einstein wrote a foreword to Hapgood's earlier book, Earth's Shifting Crust, in 1958. That is worth pausing on. Einstein described Hapgood's thinking as original and worthy of attention. He did not endorse it fully, but he engaged with it seriously. That kind of engagement does not happen with ideas that deserve only dismissal. Hapgood's core argument was this: several ancient maps, including the Piri Reis chart, depict features of Antarctica that could only have been recorded when the continent was substantially free of ice, free enough that a real navigable coastline existed, visible from the sea, measurable by whoever was sailing past. Hapgood brought his findings to cartographic experts and commissioned detailed comparative analysis between the Piri Reis map and modern Antarctic surveys. The response he received from trained cartographers was not outright dismissal. Several acknowledged that specific sections of the map's southern coastline exhibited an accuracy that coincidence alone struggled to explain. None of them pursued it further. The geological record does not make Hapgood's underlying premise impossible. Antarctica was not always the frozen world it is today. Research confirms that parts of the continent, particularly the Ross Sea region, experienced conditions warm enough for liquid water and biological activity as recently as 6,000 years ago. This is documented science. In the years following the Second World War, Antarctic research programs began recovering sediment cores from the floor of the Ross Sea. Those cores contained fine-grained deposits, the kind laid down by rivers running through temperate landscapes. Researchers dated those layers to a period of warmth far more recent than mainstream glaciation timelines suggest. The researchers who analysed those cores did not suppress their findings. They published them, presented them at conferences, and moved on. What happened next is the part one keep returning to. The data was acknowledged, then quietly set aside. Not refuted, not disproven, simply never followed to its logical conclusion. Now let us talk about Operation Highjump. In 1946, the United States Navy launched one of the largest military expeditions ever sent to the southern continent. 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and nearly 5,000 personnel. The official stated mission was scientific research, cold weather training, and the establishment of Antarctic bases. I want to be fair to that explanation. Post-war America had surplus military capacity and genuine geopolitical interest in the Southern Hemisphere. The Cold War was beginning. The Soviet Union was watching. There were real strategic reasons for projecting naval force toward Antarctica, and none of those reasons require anything unusual to explain. What that explanation does not fully account for is the abrupt early termination of the mission. Operation Highjump was planned to last 6 to 8 months. It ended after roughly 8 weeks, with no full public accounting of why. Admiral Richard Byrd, who commanded the expedition, returned to the United States in February 1947. The official reasons for the early return pointed to equipment failure and the advancing Antarctic season. These are real constraints, but the planning had always accounted for Antarctic seasonal conditions from the start. The mission was designed with full knowledge of when winter arrives. The early departure came before the harshest conditions had fully set in. Byrd gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, in which he warned that the United States must prepare for aircraft attack from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He said this in early 1947. The jet age had barely started. The Cold War had barely been named. I am not suggesting Byrd was describing hidden ruins or ancient peoples. I want to be very clear about that. He may have been speaking loosely, referring to Soviet capabilities in strategic shorthand, or being imperfectly translated from the original Spanish. All of those explanations are available. I have considered each of them carefully. What I cannot settle is the pattern, not any single anomaly, the pattern. A map from 1513 showing a coastline that should not exist. Sediment cores indicating warmth the official timeline cannot absorb. An expedition in 1946 ending early with no complete explanation. 3 moments. 3 separate gaps. These gaps appear at the same structural location in the narrative every time. Exactly where the evidence might pull toward a conclusion the official record has not made room for. I want to be clear that this is not a dramatic claim. It is a descriptive one. The incompleteness is not random. It is located. This is where I want to slow down, because the temptation is to rush toward a conclusion, to name a hidden hand, to sketch a conspiracy, to give this pattern a face. I am resisting that deliberately, because once you personify the silence, you make it easier to dismiss. What I am describing is not a directed cover-up orchestrated by a single institution or government. It is something more diffuse and, in its way, more troubling. It is what happens when multiple institutions operating independently reach the same quiet conclusion that certain questions are not useful to pursue. Think about what a coordinated suppression would actually require. Geologists, cartographers, historians, naval officers, and archivists across multiple countries and centuries would all need to have agreed explicitly to conceal the same thing. Britain, the United States, Norway, and the Soviet Union in the same silent pact. That is not plausible. What is plausible is something quieter. Institutional knowledge organizes itself around conclusions that are safe and professionally useful. When a geologist recovers sediment suggesting an ice-free Antarctic coastline in recent human prehistory, the weight of established frameworks pushes that finding toward the margins, not through censorship, but through academic inertia. Funding goes to questions with predictable answers. Careers are built on consensus, not on anomalies. Journals prioritize findings that extend established frameworks rather than fracture them. None of this requires villains. It requires only institutions behaving exactly as institutions always behave, conservatively, in their own long-term interest, away from risk. There is no memo that says, "Do not investigate ancient Antarctic habitation." There is no directive, no classified order, no document with a smoking edge. What exists instead is the ordinary process by which a field's center of gravity pulls away from findings that would require rebuilding everything. The most effective suppression never knows itself as suppression. The silence does not need an architect. It assembles itself from the accumulated weight of 1,000 small professional decisions, each individually reasonable, each pointing quietly away from the same uncomfortable place. That is not a conspiracy. That is something more durable than a conspiracy, because it requires no maintenance and leaves no fingerprints. And yet, the Oronteus Finaeus map of 1531, drawn 18 years after Piri Reis, also depicts a southern continent with mountain ranges and river systems rendered in specific detail that cartographic convention alone does not explain. Those mountain ranges correspond, in general location, to features confirmed by modern subglacial radar surveys. I am aware of how that sounds. Oronteus Finaeus, like Piri Reis, may have been a skilled cartographer whose speculative southern continent happened, by logic and luck, to land on configurations that partially resemble the real thing. That is a rational explanation. I have tried to be content with it. The problem is that the accuracy is specific in ways that general guesswork does not produce. Speculative landmasses tend to be amorphous and geographically vague. The continent on the Finaeus map is neither. It has a distinct coastline, interior features, and a peninsula that corresponds closely to the Antarctic Peninsula. What strikes me about both maps is not their existence alone, but their timing. They appear in the early 16th century, a period of intense cartographic activity. If someone was assembling knowledge from older sources during that window, they were doing so at precisely the moment when such knowledge might survive transmission, before being lost again. Here is what I keep returning to. If Antarctica was substantially ice-free 6,000 years ago, and the geological evidence permits this, then anatomically modern humans already existed in large numbers. Homo sapiens had been on Earth for over 200,000 years. Agriculture was emerging. Navigation was real. The possibility of a maritime culture reaching an ice-free southern continent is not technically absurd. We know humans were crossing open ocean by 6,000 years ago. The Pacific was being navigated. The idea that no one reached a warming southern continent during that era is itself a claim that requires evidence. I am not claiming a lost civilization built monumental structures beneath the ice. I want to be clear about exactly what I am, and am not saying. I am saying that the intersection of geological evidence, ancient cartography, and structural incompleteness in the official record creates a question the current consensus does not cleanly answer. And the question is not a small one. If people were in Antarctica, even briefly, even as seasonal seafarers, then the map of human prehistory requires revision, not because of Antarctica itself, but because of what it implies about the range and memory of the people who came before everything we call history. That word is the one that stops me. Memory. What we know about the deep human past is the portion of it that survived in stone, in bone, in language, in material that does not dissolve. Everything else is gone. We tend to treat absence of evidence as evidence of absence. The geological record has a different word for that assumption. It calls it erosion. Whatever existed on an ice-free Antarctic shore 10,000 years ago was subsequently buried beneath kilomortars of ice, moving at pressures that shear and subduct everything in their path. Absence of evidence here was manufactured by physics. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 12 nations, placed the continent under a framework of international scientific cooperation and suspended all territorial claims. I am not suggesting the treaty was designed to conceal anything, but it also, structurally, concentrated access to the continent within a small set of institutions and their approved research programs. Who gets to look, and for what? Under whose supervision? These are not conspiratorial questions, they are administrative ones. But administration shapes possibility. When access is limited and the institutions controlling it have a professional investment in the existing consensus, anomalous research becomes quietly, structurally difficult to pursue. So here is where I leave you. Not with an answer, I do not have one, and I distrust the people who claim they do, but with a shape, the outline of something that does not resolve, a convergence of data points that the standard explanations handle individually, but cannot account for together. There may have been people in Antarctica before the ice closed over it. They may have left no trace, because no trace survives that kind of burial. The maps that seem to show their world may be coincidental, or they may be the last faint whisper of geographic memory, older than any civilization we recognize. I do not know which of those is true. I am not sure the line between them is as clean as we would like it to be. What I know is this: the question has been asked before, carefully and quietly, by people far more qualified than I am, and it has not been answered. It has been set aside. There is a difference between a question that has been answered and a question that has simply stopped being asked. The first is settled, the second only appears to be, and the appearance of settlement, maintained long enough, becomes indistinguishable from the real thing, which is, I think, precisely the point. Somewhere beneath the ice, the oldest undisturbed shore on Earth may exist. Not waiting for discovery, It has already been drawn faintly in the margins of charts 5 centuries old by people who did not understand what they were copying. It is waiting for the silence around it to become uncomfortable enough to break,